Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that, I'll be honest, usually gets skipped over in standard history classes.
It really does.
You know the drill.
Hmm.
We usually jump from the ancient glories of the Mauryas and Guptas, maybe you mention Ashoka, and then, boom, we fast forward straight to the Mughals or the Delhi Sultanate.
Right.
We treat the centuries in between like a waiting room, a chaotic, confusing waiting room that we just want to get through.
Which is a massive mistake. In fact, I would argue it is the single biggest blind spot in our popular historical understanding. We're looking at the early medieval period in India, roughly the 7th century to the 12th century AD.
Okay.
And the notes here paint a picture that is, well, it's chaotic, yes, and it's violent, but it is also incredibly sophisticated.
That's what I'm realizing looking at this stack of research. It wasn't a dark age. That's the cliche we usually hear, right? That after the fall of the great ancient empires, everything just went dark.
Exactly. And that is a very Eurocentric view of history. In Europe, the collapse of Rome led to a decline in infrastructure, literacy, and centralized power, the so-called Dark Ages.
Right.
But in India, the story is completely different. When the Central Empire collapsed here, it didn't lead to darkness. It led to an explosion of regional color.
So instead of the lights going out, it's like 1,000 fireworks went off at once.
That is a beautiful way to put it. It's less The Walking Dead and more Game of Thrones. You have distinct regional identities forming, massive temple-building projects rising out of the jungles and mountains, and a political landscape defined by intense competition.
And we all know the competition, while stressful, often drives innovation.
Precisely. If you want to understand why India looks the way it does today, why Bengali literature is distinct from Marathi, why the temple architecture in Orissa looks different than in Tamil Nadu, you have to look at this period. This is the crucible.
Okay, let's step into the crucible. To understand this chaos, we have to start with the inciting incident. We have to set the scene with the transition era.
Right. So rewind to the mid-7th century. The north of India was held together more or less by Emperor Harsha. He was the last of the big guys of the ancient era. A charismatic figure, a patron of the arts, keeping the peace.
A stabilizing force.
A huge one. But in 647 AD, Harsha dies.
And unlike in the movies, there isn't a neat succession plan. He leaves no heir.
And the silence that follows is deafening. For centuries, the psychological anchor of North India was the idea of a centralized Kravartan, a wheel-turning universal monarch. Pataliputra had been the center of gravity. When Harsha died, that glue dissolved. The empire didn't just crumble, it shattered.
But you mentioned earlier, it didn't shatter into anarchy.
No, it shattered into ambition. Instead of one giant monolith, we see the rise of numerous local states and kingdoms. It was a decentralization of power. And almost immediately, we see new players trying to pick up the pieces.
Okay, so who's first on the scene?
One of the first, and most surprising, is a ruler from Kashmir named Lalitaditya.
Lalitaditya of the Karkota dynasty. Now, I have to be honest, when I think of Kashmir, I think of beautiful valleys, houseboats, snow-capped peaks. I don't typically think of it as the launching pad for an imperial conquest of the Indian plains.
Which is why Lalitaditya is such a standout figure. He defies the geographical norm. In the 8th century, he essentially storms down from the Himalayas. He defeats Yasovarman of Kannauj, which was a huge deal, as Kannauj was the premier city of the time.
The big prize.
The big prize. He marches into the Punjab, and some sources even suggest his armies reached as far as Bengal on the Deccan.
That is a logistical nightmare. Marching an army from the high-altitude, snowy peaks to the humid, sweltering plains of Bengal, that's not just warfare, that's an endurance test.
It shows an incredible level of military organization, but Lalitaditya wasn't just a brute conqueror. He was trying to project a new kind of imperial aesthetic. To understand him, you don't look at his battles, you look at what he built. Specifically, the Marten Sun Temple.
I was looking at the architectural notes on that. It's in ruins now, but you can still see the scale. And the notes mention it has a peristylar layout. For those of us who aren't architecture nerds, let's unpack that.
It means it had a central courtyard surrounded by a colonnade of pillars. If you look at the photos, the pillars are fluted. They look Greek.
That's exactly what I thought. It looks like something you'd see in Athens, but it's sitting against the backdrop of the Kashmiri Himalayas.
It's virtually unknown in other Indian temples of the time. It shows that Kashmir was this incredible melting pot. You had Gandharan influences, Gupta art, Chinese styles, and Sasanian Persian styles all mixing together. Lalitaditya was signaling that his empire was cosmopolitan, a bridge between worlds.
But, as is the case with many of these lightning-fast conquerors, his empire didn't last long after him. It receded back to the mountains.
It did.
And that brings us to the main event. The vacuum in the north was still there, and three big predators began to circle the prize.
This is the tripartite struggle, the three-part war. This is the defining geopolitical engine of North India for nearly 300 years.
And the prize they were fighting over was the city of Kanauj.
This is what I found confusing initially. Today, Kanauj is a district in Uttar Pradesh, famous for its perfumes. But back then, it was the center of the universe. Why was everyone so obsessed with this one city?
It's about legitimacy and geography. First, geography. Kanauj sat right in the middle of the Doab, the land between the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. This is the most fertile land in North India.
Their breadbasket.
Breadbasket. If you held Kanauj, you controlled the agricultural surplus and the trade routes of the north.
So it's the economic engine.
Exactly. But secondly, it was the symbol. Pataliputra, the old capital, had declined. Kanauj had taken its place. You couldn't call yourself the Emperor of India, the Chakravartin, unless you sat on the throne of Kanauj. It was the status symbol.
Okay, so it's the Iron Throne, and we have three contenders. In the red corner from the east, we have the Palas. In the blue corner from the west, the Pratiharas.
And coming in from the south, the Rashtrakutas. Let's break them down, because they each have such a distinct personality. Let's start with the Palace.
The Palas are fascinating because of their origin story. We are in the mid-8th century in Bengal. The region is in total chaos. The texts describe it as Matsyanya.
The law of the fish.
Correct. The big fish eats the little fish.
Good.
Total anarchy, warlords fighting, no safety for the common people. The chieftains were sick of it. So they did something revolutionary.
What's that?
They didn't wait for a warlord to conquer them. They held an assembly and chose a king.
They elected Gopala. That sounds incredibly modern.
Well, let's not imagine a ballot box with every peasant voting. It was likely a consensus among the powerful nobles and chieftains, but still, the legitimacy came from selection, not just bloodline or conquest. Gopala founded the Pala dynasty, and they called their realm the Kingdom of Dharma.
Because they were patrons of Buddhism, right? That was their thing.
Yes, and this is a key distinction. While the rest of India was seeing a resurgence of Puranic Hinduism worshipping Shiva, and Vishnu the Palace were the last great imperial patrons of Buddhism.
Keeping the flame alive.
They really were. Gopala's son, Dharmapala, really expanded this. He revived the famous Nalanda University and founded Vikramashila University.
And these weren't just monasteries where people meditated in silence. These were full-blown university.
They were the Ivy League of the medieval world. And getting in was probably harder than getting into Harvard today.
I found a detail about Nalanda in the notes that I loved. It wasn't just an open campus. There was a gatekeeper test.
Literally at the gate. You would travel for months, maybe from China or Korea or Tibet to get to Nalanda. You'd arrive, dusty and tired with your backpack of scrolls, and the Dvarapala, the gatekeeper, would stop you.
But he wasn't a security guard.
No, he was a scholar of the highest order.
So you had to pass an oral exam just to get into the parking lot.
Essentially. The gatekeeper would ask you difficult philosophical, logical, and theological questions right there in front of everyone. Define the nature of emptiness. Refute this logical fallacy.
That is high pressure. Talk about performance anxiety.
And the pass rate. According to the Chinese traveler Xuanzang, who visited a bit earlier, it was maybe 20%. 8 out of 10 were turned away.
Wow.
Most people failed at the door and had to go home. That was how they maintained the intellectual standard. If you were inside Nalanda, you were the elite of the elite.
It creates a serious intellectual culture. But the Palace weren't just looking inward at their books. They had international reach, didn't they?
They did. They looked east. The palace had deep connections with Southeast Asia. We have records of the Pala king Devapala receiving an ambassador from the Sailendra king, the ruler of Sumatra and Java.
The Srivijaya Empire.
The very same. And the Sailendra king wanted to build a monastery at Nalanda for his students.
And Devapala helped him out.
He didn't just help. He granted the tax revenue from 5 whole villages to fund the upkeep of that Sumatran monastery in perpetuity.
That's incredible.
It shows that the Buddhist world was interconnected. The Bay of Bengal wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. Ideas, monks, resources were flowing freely between Bengal and Indonesia.
So the Palas are holding down the east with their books and their trades. Now let's look west. The Pratiharas. Who were they?
The Gurjar Pratiharas, their vibe is very different. They originated in the Rajasthan and Gujarat region. The name Pratihara literally means doorkeeper.
And they took that role seriously. They viewed themselves as the protectors of India.
Because they had a very specific threat at their doorstep. By the 8th century, the Arab armies had conquered Sindh. They were looking to push east into the Indian heartland. The Pratiharas stood as the bulwark.
The Great Wall of Rajasthan, basically.
In a way, they were known as the Agnikula Rajputs born from the fire, and they successfully held the line. They prevented the Arab expansion for nearly 3 centuries. That is a massive historical contribution.
That's huge.
If the Pratiharas had crumbled early on, the history of the subcontinent would look completely different.
And among them, we have this figure, Mihira Bhoja.
Mihira Bhoja is arguably the greatest of the Pratihara rulers. He was a devotee of Vishnu and took the title Adivaraha.
That refers to the boar avatar of Vishnu, right?
Yeah.
The one who lifts the earth out of the cosmic ocean.
Exactly. The symbolism is powerful. He was saying, I am the savior of the land. I am lifting the earth from the chaos. He even minted coins with the boar image on them. He was projecting strength and stability.
And he didn't just fight. He built. The notes mention the Telika Mandir in Gwalior. I've seen pictures of it. It's this massive rectangular tower, very imposing.
It creates a very distinct silhouette. So you have the intellectual palace in the east, the warrior Pratiharas in the west, and then you have the third player, the Rashtrakutas from the Deccan.
The Rashtrakutas seem like the wild cards here. They are based in the south-central region, modern Maharashtra and Karnataka, but they kept marching north and just beating everyone.
They were the spoilers. Every time the palace or Pratiharas thought they had secured Kannauj, the Rashtrakutas would thunder up from the south, defeat them, and then usually go home.
Why go home? Why not stay?
That's the million-dollar question. Their power base was in the Deccan. Holding a city so far north was probably a logistical stretch, but their military was feared. Their horses and elephants were considered the best in the land.
The Arab travelers of the time actually seemed more impressed by the Rashtrakutas than anyone else.
They were. The merchant Suleiman, writing in the 9th century, referred to the Rashtrakuta monarch as the Balhara, the king of kings of Al-Hind.
Al-Hind meaning India.
The whole of India, yes. He actually ranked the Rashtrakuta emperor alongside the Caliph of Baghdad, the emperor of China, and the emperor of Constantinople as the 4 great kings of the world.
That puts them in the absolute top tier of global powers. But their legacy isn't just military. We have to talk about the Kailash temple at Ellora, because built doesn't seem like the right word.
Sculpted is better. Or maybe excavated. The Kailash temple is a monolith.
Meaning it's one single rock.
One single rock. It wasn't built by stacking stones up from the ground. It was carved by cutting a mountain down.
That blows my mind every time I think about it. Walk us through the process. How do you even start?
You start at the top of a basalt cliff. You dig 3 massive trenches to isolate a block of stone, a block the size of the Parthenon, and then you start carving the roof, and you work your way down to the floor.
But the risk. I mean, if you make one mistake...
That's the thing. There's no undo button. If you chip the nose off a statue or crack a pillar, or if the rock has a natural fissure you didn't see, you can't replace the stone. The whole thing is ruined.
That is insane.
It required a level of planning, visualization, and geological understanding that is almost impossible to comprehend.
They removed something like 200,000 tons of rock.
Estimates vary, but yes, hundreds of thousands of tons, removed with hammers and chisels. It was commissioned by the Rashtrakuta king, Krishna III. It stands as a testament to the immense resources and the skilled labor force they commanded. It was a statement: the Pratiharas can build towers, but we can move mountains.
There's another interesting social note about the Rashtrakutas. The source material mentions the visibility of women in their administration.
Yes, this is quite significant. We have inscriptions showing Rashtrakuta queens and princesses managing administration and issuing endowments. We see names like Queen Salapatirika granting land on her own authority. It suggests a level of public authority for royal women that was relatively higher than in some other contemporary dynasties of the time.
So we have these 3 giants, Pala, Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, locked in this triangular war for Kannauj. But while they were fighting, the cultural landscape was evolving in really specific ways. We mentioned the architecture, but let's zoom in on the art and science for a second.
Let's see that.
The Palas, for instance. It says here they pioneered miniature painting.
Correct. The Pala School of Art is famous for illustrations on palm leaves. Remember, paper wasn't widely used yet. They would treat palm leaves to make them durable and then paint incredibly detailed, tiny scenes from Buddhist texts. This is the precursor to the miniature painting traditions that would become famous later in Indian history.
And they also mastered the last waxed technique for bronze sculptures.
That's the Cire-Perdue technique. You make a wax model, cover it in clay, melt the wax out, and pour in the molten metal. It allowed for incredibly fluid, dynamic figures. The Pala bronzes are famous for their grace. They don't look stiff. They look like they're in motion.
And speaking of intellect in motion, we have to talk about the engineer king. The Paramaras of Malwa produce a ruler named Raja Bhoja. And this guy, he wasn't just a king, he was a polymath.
Raja Bhoja is a legendary figure. In Indian folklore, he's the archetype of the scholar king, and the historical record backs that up. He didn't just patronize scholars, he was one.
He was in the lab himself.
Exactly. He wrote books on medicine, astronomy, grammar, and, most surprisingly, civil engineering.
The book is called Samrangan Sutravar, right?
Yes, and it's not poetry. It deals with architecture, town planning, and even mechanical devices. He discusses how to build robotic puppets, how to construct palaces, and how to manage water.
And he practiced what he preached.
He did. He founded the city of Bhojapur and built a massive reservoir. The dam he built was an engineering marvel of its time. It created a lake that was huge. It's refreshing to see a king remembered for his books and his dams as much as his battles.
Absolutely. But speaking of things that get built, as these big empires, the Palas and Patiharas, started to decline, we see the rise of the regional powers, the clans that would become the Rajputs.
This is the era where the Rajput identity really begins to solidify. As the Pratihara power waned, their feudatories, the local governors and generals, declared independence. You have the Chandelas in Bundelkhand, the Tomaras in Delhi, the Gahadwalas in Kannauj.
Let's hit the Chandelas first, because they built Khajuraho.
They did. The Kandariya Mahadeva temple there is the pinnacle of the North Indian Nagara style of architecture. The tower, or shikara, is designed to look like a mountain range, rising higher and higher.
And Khajuraho is, of course, famous for the erotic sculptures. We have to address the elephant in the room. Why put erotica on a temple?
It's a question that has baffled Victorian archaeologists and modern tourists alike, but you have to view it through the lens of the time. This is an era influenced by Tantricism. In the Tantric view, the world isn't something to be shunned. It's a manifestation of the divine energy.
So the physical union is a metaphor.
It's a metaphor for the union of the soul with the divine. But also, you have to think about the Hindu worldview, which has 4 goals in life: dharma, duty; artha, wealth; kama, desire; and moksha, liberation. A temple represents the entire cosmos. It represents all of life.
So you can't just leave a part of it out.
You can't leave out kama. It belongs there just as much as the gods do. It was a celebration of life, fertility, and auspiciousness. It wasn't seen as profane.
It's a very holistic view. And then we have the Tomaras. This is interesting because they're the ones who established Dilika,
which becomes Delhi. Anangapala Tomara is credited with founding the city in the mid-11th century. He built the earliest waterworks, like the Enang Tal and the citadel Lalkot.
So the roots of India's modern capital lie in this period of regional fragmentation. It started as a Rajput fort guarding the entrance to the plains.
Exactly. A strategic location that would eventually become the seat of the empires.
Moving east, we have distinct powers rising in Assam and Orissa.
Assam, or Kamarupa, was always fiercely independent. The geography, the Brahmaputra Valley, makes it hard to invade. In the 13th century, we see the arrival of the Ahams, led by Sukhafa. They migrated from the Shan region and established a kingdom that would last for 600 years.
An incredible run.
A very long one. And they had a unique system called the Paik system.
Right. Tell us about that.
It was a form of forced labor or state service. Every able-bodied male was a Paik and had to serve the state in the army or in public works for a certain period each year.
Like a militia draft.
More comprehensive. It allowed them to mobilize their entire population for war or for building massive embankments and rice paddies. It created a very militarized and organized society, which helped them beat back invasions, including later Mughal attempts time and again. They even defeated Bakhtiar Khalji's army.
And in Orissa, or Kalinga, we have the Eastern Ganges. And they gave us the Sun Temple at Konark.
Built by Narasimhalur in the 13th century, we talked about the Martan Sun Temple in Kashmir being Greek-influenced. Konark is pure indigenous imagination. The entire temple is designed as a colossal chariot for the sun god, Surya.
A stone chariot.
A chariot the size of a cathedral. It has 24 giant stone wheels carved into the base, each one nearly 10 feet high, and it's pulled by 7 stone horses.
The wheels actually function as sundials, don't they?
They do. The shadows cast by the spokes can tell you the time with incredible accuracy. It's a fusion of art, astronomy, and engineering. Just a marvel.
It's amazing. We're jumping around the map, and everywhere we look, Kashmir, Bengal, Rajasthan, Orissa, there is this massive investment in art and stone. But now we have to head south. Because while the north was fragmented, the south saw the rise of a true imperial superpower.
The Cholas.
The Cholas are, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable dynasties in world history. Under Rajaraja I and his son Rajendra, roughly 985 to 1044 AD, they became a thalassocracy.
A thalassocracy, I love that word. It means rule by the sea.
Precisely. Most Indian empires were land-based. They cared about territory. The Cholas understood the power of the ocean. They didn't just trade, they controlled the trade routes. They conquered Sri Lanka, they controlled the Maldives. But their most audacious move was under Rajendra I.
The naval raid on Srivijaya.
Yes. Srivijaya was a powerful kingdom based in Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. They controlled the Malacca Strait, which was the choke point for trade between China and India.
So if you wanted to ship goods from Song Dynasty China to India, you had to pass through their toll booth. Exactly. And when Srivijaya started creating problems for Indian merchants, maybe taxing them too much or blocking them, Rajendra Chola didn't just send a diplomatic note. He mobilized a massive fleet.
That is a huge logistical challenge. Crossing the Bay of Bengal with a medieval army, transporting elephants, horses, thousands of soldiers, food, water.
It's an immense undertaking. It's an amphibious assault in the 11th century, and it was successful. The Chola inscriptions detail the conquest. They captured the king of Kedah, plundered the capital, and secured the trade route.
Wow.
It demonstrated that the Bay of Bengal was effectively a Chola lake for a time.
And Rajendra wasn't just satisfied with the sea, he also marched north to the Ganges.
He did. He marched his armies all the way to the banks of the Ganges River to assert his dominance over the north. And to commemorate it, he built a new capital city, Gangaikonda Cholapuram,
Which translates to?
the city of the Chola who conquered the Ganges. He even built a massive artificial lake there, the Chola Gangam, which was filled with water brought from the Ganges.
He brought water all the way from the Ganges to Tamil Nadu.
In pots. Thousands of pots carried by the defeated kings or his own soldiers. He poured it into the lake as a liquid pillar of victory.
That is a serious flex. But, despite the conquests and the liquid pillars, the thing about the Cholas that really blew my mind in the reading wasn't the war. It was the administration, specifically the Uttaramur inscription.
Ah, yes. This is the aha moment you mentioned.
Listeners, you have to hear this. We usually think of ancient kings as absolute rulers, off with his head type stuff. But the Cholas had a system of local self-government that sounds like a democracy.
It was a very sophisticated system of local governance.
Yeah.
The inscription at Uttaramur, which dates to the early 10th century, describes exactly how the village assembly, the Sabha, was chosen.
Okay.
It wasn't just appointed by the king. It was a lottery system, but with strict qualifications.
Break that down. How did you get on the committee?
First, the village was divided into 30 wards. Each ward would nominate candidates. But you couldn't just run because you wanted to. You had to own tax-paying land. You had to have a house built on your own site. You had to be between 35 and 70 years old.
Okay, standard stuff.
And this is crucial. You had to know the Vedas and be virtuous.
So, educated property owners, that's fairly standard for early representative systems. But the disqualifications are what it gets really interesting.
Oh, they were strict.
Yeah.
If you had served on the committee before and failed to submit your accounts, disqualified?
So, accountability.
Accountability. If you had committed a serious crime, disqualified. If you stole the property of others, disqualified. Even your close relatives could be disqualified to prevent corruption.
They were really trying to weed out nepotism and corruption.
They were. So once they had the list of eligible candidates for each ward, they wrote the names on palm leaves. They put the leaves into a pot. This is the Kudavalai system. Then they would call a young boy, usually described as an innocent child who couldn't be bribed or influenced, to reach into the pot and pull the names out one by one.
That is incredible. 1,000 years ago, they had a system to prevent corruption, ensure competence, and rotate power through random selection. It makes you wonder how different history would be if that model had scaled up.
It is a fascinating what if. The Chola state was a strange mix of a very powerful centralized monarchy at the top, dealing with war and big temples like the Brihadisvara, and this vibrant autonomous democracy at the village level.
And the central government
Yeah.
just let them be.
As long as the taxes were paid, yes. They didn't interfere much. They even conducted these meticulous land surveys, like the Doomsday Book in England, to fix tax rates based on soil fertility. It was a very well-run machine.
And the Cholas weren't the only ones in the south. We also have the Pandyas further down in Madurai.
The Pandyas were the masters of the pearl fisheries and the Western trade. When Marco Polo visited in the late 13th century, he was amazed.
He visited the port of Callao, right?
Yes. He describes it as a bustling hub. He was particularly impressed by the horse trade. The Pandyas imported thousands of horses from Arabia and Persia every year.
Why so many? Why not just breed them?
Because the climate of South India isn't great for breeding war horses. The soil, the heat, they would die or become unfit for war quickly. So they couldn't breed a domestic supply. They needed a constant influx of fresh cavalry mounts. It was a massive expense.
So it was like a subscription service for their army. They had to keep buying new units.
Exactly. And the traders, the Kudiai made a fortune. Marco Polo also noted that the king treated foreign merchants very well, which is why ships from China and Arabia flocked there. It was a free trade paradise.
We also had the Kakatiyas in the Andhra region. And there's a standout figure there, Queen Rudramadevi.
One of the few ruling queens in Indian history. She ruled for 35 years in the 13th century. And interestingly, she often used a male name, Rudradeva, in inscriptions, and wore male attire in sculptures.
To project authority in a patriarchal world.
Likely, yes, to fit the traditional mold of the king. But make no mistake, she was the ruler. She fought wars, defended the kingdom against the Yadavas, and managed a very turbulent region. She is a true warrior queen icon.
And finally, the Hoysalas in Karnataka.
The Hoysalas are best known for their art. If you look at the Chenikasalva temple at Belur or the Hoysaswara temple at Halabid, the carving it's hyper-realistic. They used soapstone.
Soapstone?
Yes, which is soft when you dig it out of the ground, but hardens over time when exposed to air.
So they could carve it like wood or ivory.
Exactly. This allowed them to carve jewelry, hairstyles, fingernails, even the texture of fabric with microscopic detail. It's like stone filigree. It's incredibly ornate.
So we've painted this picture of a vibrant, wealthy, churning subcontinent. Regional powers, naval empires, democratic villages, towering temples. But then we hit the turning point, the advent of Islam.
And we must be careful with our terms here. The advent of Islam happened long before the political conquest.
Right, the trade connection.
Exactly. Arab traders had been settling on the Malabar coast since the 7th century, shortly after the birth of Islam. They intermarried with the local populations, giving rise to the Mappila community, and were generally welcomed for the prosperity they brought.
And the Rashtrakutas.
The Rashtrakutas, as we mentioned, allowed Muslim traders to build mosques and preach freely because it was good for business. The initial contact was peaceful and commercial.
But then came the political expansion. We see the Arabs take Sind in 712 A.D.
Muhammad bin Qasim defeated King Dahir of Sind. This established an Arab foothold, but for a long time it stayed contained to Sind. The Pratiharas, as we mentioned earlier, effectively blocked further expansion into the heartland for centuries.
But that changes with the Ghaznavids, Mahmud of Ghazni.
Mahmud of Ghazni is a pivotal figure. Ruling from Afghanistan around the year 1000 AD, he launched 17 expeditions into India. But his motivation is often debated and misunderstood.
The notes say his goal was plunder, not empire.
That is the key distinction. Mahmud was building a massive empire in Central Asia. He needed gold, silver, and slaves to finance his wars there and to beautify his capital, Ghazni. He raided rich cities, Mathura, Kannauj, and most famously, the Somnath Temple in 1025 AD.
He sacked the temple.
He smashed the idols and took the wealth. It was a brutal act of iconoclasm and looting, but, and this is important, he didn't stay to rule. He looted and left. He was a raider.
So he was a shock to the system, but he didn't change the political map permanently. That shift to empire, to actually ruling India, comes with the Ghurids.
Yes. Muhammad of Ghor in the late 12th century, his goal was different. He wanted territory. He wanted to annex North India.
And standing in his way was a Chauhan ruler of Ajmer and Delhi, Prithviraj Chauhan. This is the big showdown.
It is the climax of this era. Prithviraj III, the romantic hero of Rajput folklore, immortalized in the Prithviraj Raso. He controlled the strategic gateway to the Gangetic Plain.
They met at the Battle of Terrain.
Twice. In 1191, the First Battle of Terrain. The two armies clashed. The Rajput army, with its elephants and heavy cavalry, charged. Ghori was wounded in personal combat and barely escaped. The Grud army broke and fled.
Prithviraj won. But he didn't chase him down, did he?
No. And historians often point to this as a strategic error. He treated it perhaps like a border skirmish, expecting Ghori to lick his wounds and stay away, or perhaps he simply didn't want to leave his territory. But Ghori went back, reorganized his army, updated his tactics, and returned just 1 year later.
1192, the Second Battle of Touraine.
And this time the outcome was different. Ghori brought light Turkish cavalry-mounted archers. He refused to engage in a head-on collision with the Rajput elephants. He used mobility.
Hit and run.
Exactly. He circled them, firing arrows, wearing them down, and feigning retreat to draw the Rajputs out of formation.
And when the formation broke,
He sent in his heavy armored cavalry for the final charge. Prithviraj was defeated and captured. This defeat opened the floodgates.
and Ghori didn't just leave.
No. He left his trusted general, Qutbuddin Aibak, in charge. Aibak went on to conquer Delhi and eventually founded the Slave Dynasty, the first dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate in 1206. This marks the definitive end of the early medieval period and the beginning of the Sultanate era.
It also led to the fall of the Godvalas in Kannauj, right? The other major power.
Yes, the Battle of Chandawar in 1194. Jayachandra of Kannauj was defeated. So within a span of 3 years, the two major powers of North India, the Chauhans and the Godvalas, were shattered.
It's a massive geopolitical shift. So let's pull back and synthesize this. We've gone from the post-Harsha vacuum through the three-way struggle for Kannauj, the rise of the Rajputs, the magnificent Chola Empire in the south, and finally the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate.
It's a sweeping narrative, and I think the key takeaway for the listener is to resist the urge to see this merely as a story of decline or defeat.
How so?
Because if you look at the cultural output, the Khajuraho temples, the Chola bronzes, the great universities like Nalanda and Vikramashila, the beginnings of regional literature, this was a civilization in full bloom. It was politically fragmented, yes. It was often violent. But it was incredibly creative.
And it laid the foundations for the regional India we know today. The languages, the local customs, the regional pride, it all crystallizes here.
Exactly. You cannot understand modern India without understanding this transition period. It's the bridge between the ancient and the medieval.
I want to leave our listeners with that provocative thought we touched on earlier, the Chola Sava.
Yes, the village democracy.
We look at history, and we often see the great men, the Alexanders, the Akbars, the Caesars. But tucked away in the 10th century Tamil country was a system where power was held by a committee of elders, chosen by lottery, accountable to the people.
It raises a fascinating question. We often assume that democracy is a purely modern Western export. But here, over 1,000 years ago, we see rigorous standards for public office and a mechanism for grassroots self-governance.
So the question is,
How might India's history, and indeed world history, have looked if the decentralized democratic nature of the Chola Saba had become the dominant model for the subcontinent rather than the centralized military empires that followed?
that is something to chew on. A road not taken.
Indeed.
Before you go, if you have a moment today, pull up your phone and search for 2 images. First, the Martan Sun Temple in Kashmir. Look at those Greek-style columns against the Himalayas. And second, the Kailash Temple at Ellora. Just look at it and remind yourself. They carved that out of a single rock, top to bottom.
It puts our modern skyscrapers to shame.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the early medieval world. There is always more to uncover.
Always. Keep learning.
See you next time.